Yo, Champion Macon. Welcome back to the Rocket Game Corner, where the audio quality is so bad that it doesn't matter that I have the flu. Now, Starfield's recent release has seen the re-emergence of one of gaming's most cheered colloquialisms. On every other video about it, you will hear some variation of, well, what did you expect? It's just another Bethesda game. And as a collective, we do hold a viewpoint that a certain style of gameplay, a certain cluster of mechanics, maybe a different coat of paint, but it seems to be the only thing that Bethesda are willing to release. But what if we're all wrong? Hunted was released in 2011 for both the PS3 and Xbox 360. It received critic scores typically ranging between 4 to 6 out of 10, and it also had one of the best reviews I've ever heard, something to the effect of, "It's like a horse whipping its tail out in this here savannah heat, never quite rid of the bugs." Now, this genre is difficult to describe as a merging of a cover shooter with a hack and slash. Some people say it's a dungeon crawler. It kind of is, and maybe best fits in that most nebulous of genres, action-adventure. And you already hear something different going on here. In my videos, I don't talk about basic objective stuff like the type of game it is or how it controls. When I hear that stuff in other people's videos, I usually kind of think of it as padding. You know, I know that you're smart, I know I can count on a certain amount of assumed knowledge on your part, but the whole point of this video is that this game is a bit of an unknown quantity. You know, it flew under the radar, and therefore it wouldn't be reasonable of me to expect that same level of knowledge out of you. So just be aware that I'm going to be going into the nitty-gritty a bit more than usual in this video, and it's just so you can learn about the game in general, as well as what my take on it is. So the core design philosophy behind Hunted is clearly co-op play, which, honestly, is pretty cool. They were designing with a particular feeling for the player in mind, rather than viewing the game as a platform for telling a story, or a genre with a series of tropes to tick off. And this is a rare phenomenon. It's a bit of a gamble when sequelitis has already taken root in the industry. So hats off here to both Exile and Bethesda for just taking a shot. Now, the game supported online play, at least in launch. It doesn't seem to work anymore. It doesn't for me. And it's not like you'd find another player anyways. So it's lucky that it also supports couch co-op and has both a campaign mode and a mode for custom levels that it calls the Crucible. And when playing either of these modes in single player, you pick between either Kadak or Ilara, but have the option to switch between them by interacting with an object present in the environment every now and then. And if you're going to give the player the option to switch between characters, then it would be much better to map a button input for this, so that the player can freely switch between the two on the fly. To me, anything less just feels like a needless restriction. Now, as for your AI partner actually plays, they're okay. They aren't burdens like Shiva and Resi. They aren't constantly dying. They've got a separate supply of healing items. They'll sometimes get to you in time to revive you, but they're not smart enough to totally rely on that. They don't deal all that much damage, but they can take some aggro for crowd control, which is definitely needed for the last boss. And given that cooperation was baked into the design of this game, an AI partner was unavoidable, and it's always going to be a difficult line to balance how useful you can make them before it starts to feel like they're stealing your thunder. So for what my opinion is worth, I think the devs did pretty good here. The only thing that really bugs me is they do have a habit of blocking doorways. And since we're just starting to get into the details a bit more, let's go into how the game actually plays. And I've got to get this one bugbear off my chest, because they make a really big fuss about how you can both shoot and stab in this game, and they even bring it up on the back of the box. And it seems just strange to me that they think that's some huge innovation. It's a bizarre degree of ignorance of the medium they've devoted their livelihood to. Even other Bethesda published games from years prior let you both shoot and use melee options in third person. Now, the devs don't sound like they're sniffing their own farts in the way that the devs of Haven did back on the PS2, but it's just weird that they make this big thing about that particular aspect of the game, especially since the game also has magic, and that's more powerful than either of those options anyway. Yeah, the balance and the damage, to me, it seems like a problem rooted in the game designed around shallowly offering as much variety as possible, when it probably would be better to put more work into a few specific elements. Like, every now and then, you get a single button prompt, kind of like an AT, just to perform an execution animation, which, alright, could have been a nice little feature, but you'll probably stop bothering when you realise there's only a couple of animations per weapon type. Now there's only 3 weapon types. Adding another couple of animations to each would not have been a monumental task, and it would have made that whole mechanic just more exciting because you wouldn't know what you're going to see next, and you wouldn't fatigue from the ones that you see so quickly. And considering how big a deal that they chose to make about the shooting mechanics, again, incredibly bare bones here. The crosshair is way too large to be effective, there's no zoom functionality, and there doesn't seem to be any additional damage for landing a headshot. So the best use I could see for the range option was just to get a quick hit or two in on an enemy who's charging straight at you, just get a little chip damage off there. But you can't really switch between weapons on the fly as a viable playstyle, which actually would have suited the game pretty well. But yeah, the animation for switching between weapons is just too long. It's just too long. And the same can kind of be said about how melee is handled, because you have a roll option, but it has a huge lag after input, and there's no iframes, so you will definitely get hit when using it. Most of the time it's just safer to just sprint away from an attack. And safer still to just block the attack with your shield, because it seems to come out on frame 0, you don't take any chip damage. The shields do have a durability stat, so they do break eventually, but the game is constantly supplying you with fresh ones faster than you can lose them, so there's no consequence. And there are very few different enemy types in this game, which, again, given so much of the game is just about beating them all to a pulp, it'd be nice to see a little variety. I would say there's around 10 different enemy types at most. It's so limited that anytime they introduce a boss, it's immediately used as a regular enemy from the next chapter onwards. And reusing assets, that can be a good way to facilitate development, and you can even, if you're smart about it, you can make it more enjoyable for the player if you reuse assets. So like if you start steamrolling enemies late game that used to bully you early on, obviously it makes you feel like, wow, look how much stronger I've gotten, something like that. But Hunted, it has an over-reliance on asset reuse, and I think one of the ways you can see that most clearly is how often the game just chucks a siege weapon in for you to use. Because, why not? They've already made the asset, right? Now, as I said, when it comes to the more conventional weapons, the game only has a handful available. However, you can also find epic variants, which they make sound way more exciting than they actually are. They don't have unique names or insane stats. They glow, and every few hits they deal some extra damage. They only have a small number of charges of this extra damage before reverting back to a regular sword or axe or bow, and you have no control over when the additional damage is activated, nor did the devs put any particular thought into where the epics in their unique chests were located. So, rather than finding one right before a boss fight, you'll find one partway through a dungeon and use up all the charges on spiders. Epic. Now, I think it would have been better to do something akin to a looter shooter here, where you can still have only a handful of weapon choices, but your epics would have persistent modifiers of some kind, so that you can effectively roll for better weapons over time, and you give the player an opportunity for making choices about what trade-offs they're willing to accept when they find a new piece of gear. And I think all of these gameplay aspects, they just kind of confirm what I was saying earlier, that this game is all about breadth, with very little depth to anything. Now, this is the kind of game that does have tons of different collectibles in the levels. I mean, they're made to look slightly different, but effectively that's what you're doing. So you can be either freeing prisoners, more conventionally you can collect dragon tears, and you can also interact with the corpses of the dead for a little dialogue option, which, I don't know, it's kind of like freeing the dragons in Spyro, kind of. Then there's also loot in the form of gold for crucible unlocks or crystals to level your character up in the campaign, and they can be gathered slowly from enemies, but you can get larger amounts from doing some light exploring and puzzle solving. Now, the game does this annoying thing though of segmenting sections and preventing backtracking, which you don't want when you're trying to encourage the player to look around for collectibles. And to be fair, the levels, they are very, very big for the most part. It's obvious why they've decided to handle exploration in this way, but they could have just made smaller levels. They could have gave the player the option to wait around while the last section reloaded, or they could have better communicated to the player that they aren't going to be able to get back on the sidewalk after stepping off that curb. As for the game's graphics, they're fine. They're about Skyrim level. I think it's fair to say Bethesda have never been too fussy about their graphics. They keep up with the time, sure, but they take whatever's passable and just run with it. And personally, I don't care too much about graphics, but this was pretty late into the life cycle of this gen. The games did typically look quite a bit better than this, and I just want it to be acknowledged that the footage would look awful even if I made any real effort at screen capture. Now, the campaign story is pretty enjoyable to play through. You'll kind of know how it's going to play out right from the get-go, but it's got its own nuances to it. And to be honest, the main strength of the narrative elements are just the interactions between Caddick and Alara. They've got a good chemistry together, and it's nice to watch a relationship between a guy and a girl where they aren't being shipped together. Like, they're just a couple of people who get along, and they live in a hard world where a reliable friend is a valuable thing. It's cool. Now, the devs apparently wanted to make more games in this world and develop it into a franchise, if the first had been successful, probably using different characters, and personally, while I would have been up for that, I'd let them roll that dice, sure. I think the writers have shown that they've got the chops for the task. However, I also think that plan would have been misdirected, as the lore is pretty bare bones here, especially for fans of high fantasy. And where the writing really shone was the interactions between the two characters that they're saying they'd discard. Like, there's one great moment where I asked Alara to stand on a switch to disable a fire trap, and as I walk towards it, the fire trap reactivates. Now, obviously, I get a little momentary frustration thinking the AI is mucking up the simplest task, standing still. But then I get some dialogue between the two, just saying she was just teasing. It was good stuff. So, look, I think I've covered just about everything you need to know about this game. I'll be honest, recording this, it sounds like I feel very negative towards Hunted, which I don't. I think it's a pretty fun time. I'm glad that I played it. I'd be happy to randomly pick it up again for some couch co-op one afternoon. I think the video just sounds negative because there's a lot of design choices that are not the best, even for what they were attempting to accomplish, and even with what was available at the time. I think the fixes are just obvious as an outside observer. But the way I see it, Hunted bucked the trend and did what Starfield, decades later, couldn't. And it was not just another Bethesda game. And if people don't support the devs and the publishers even, when they do take these gambles, then I don't think it's fair to complain that they keep iterating on what does work for them. So, what do you think? Are you one of the few who've played Hunted? And are there any more Bethesda, not Bethesda games out there? Let me know down below.